All right, anatomy physiology. This is going to be part two of the muscle presentation. So seeing that we got a little bit behind on Monday, we're just going to pick up this on Tuesday. So we're going to kind of wrap up, I think, with sliding filament theory before we go on winter break. So hopefully you went through that structure. You know what a fiber is. You know, that whole classification, the hierarchy for a muscle. If you're not sure, you may want to go back a couple slides to this one here. So we got the muscle, we got the fascicle, myofibril, myofilament, actin, myosin. So that's from largest to smallest. And so we constructed muscle, fascicle down to fiber, and then we'll have to do a little bit more with going down to the smallest level. So again, when we talk about sliding filament theory, it's a model, and again, all models are wrong. This is our best understanding, but it's a theory of how muscle contraction works. I'm not going to have you draw it out or anything, but what is needed is ATP for energy, calcium, myosin and actin, acetylcholine, and cholinesterase. So as long as you know those, you should be pretty good. And so you've already watched the video over muscles on how muscle sliding filament theory works. That's the point of doing that. But here's the sliding filament tabletop well. It's just there's an animation there. I may show it in class, I may not. And this may be more of week 15. But the energy source for your muscle contraction is ATP, and that's by cell respiration. That does occur in the mitochondria. And so creatine phosphate increases regeneration of ATP. So sometimes you hear about people taking creatine. It's often to produce more ATP, you get more energy, you can do more metabolic activity. And so about 25% of the energy produced during cell respiration is used as a metabolic process, and the rest is in the form of heat, heat being the most wasted form of energy. And the ATP is really used to maintain your body temperature. So why might products like procreatine claim to increase energy? Because again, it's the idea is that the creatine is going to help produce more. Here's some other terms. There's threshold stimulus, all or none response, motor unit, recruitment, muscle tone, muscular hypertrophy, muscular atrophy, muscle fatigue, muscle cramp, and oxygen debt. So I'm just going to kind of go through these terms with you. So the threshold stimulus is the minimal strength required to cause a contraction. And so once you reach a threshold, the muscle will contract. And so how this occurs is that the motor neurons will release acetylcholine, and acetylcholine is the neurotransmitter. I don't know if I'm going to try to mark on the screen. It's not at this point. And then the all or none response is that you're either the muscles are going to contract or they're not. So that's kind of how that goes. Motor unit, it's a muscle fiber and anything that it will that's activated by a neuron. And so recruitment is the idea that more and more fibers contract as intensity of stimulus increases. So as your muscles contract, right, as that intensity of that contraction occurs, more and more of these fibers will kind of jump in. And then muscle tone, that's just a contraction of individual fibers in muscles at rest. So if you have muscle tone, right, as opposed to not muscle tone. So muscle tone, those of you that maybe exercise a little bit more than others, you probably have your muscle tone's probably a little more defined. There's just some movements there for stretching. Hypertrophy is that muscles enlarge. Working out or even certain disorders can cause muscle hypertrophy. And then atrophy is when muscles become small and weak due to disuse or disease. Fatigue, muscles lose ability to contract. A cramp is a sustained voluntary contraction. You're never in the middle of the night, you got a muscle cramp. And then oxygen debt is what happens is so oxygen is needed to create ATP due to aerobic respiration. And so if you don't have enough oxygen, your body is going to start to produce lactic acid, and that lactic acid will build up in your muscles, and that's what causes your muscles to be sore. So runners, you put in an extra long run, your muscles are sore, you probably reached oxygen debt. If you're lifting, those kind of things. And so what happens is you've reached this oxygen debt, you don't have enough oxygen debt or enough oxygen to complete these metabolic processes, lactic acid, and it goes into a fermentation process, which at this point I'm not going to get into right now. We talked about origin insertion already, and then action potential, that's just the electrical charge. So let's kind of talk about some things. So rigor mortis is just once a person expires or is dispatched, the joints of the body stiffen, and so that's called rigor mortis. And depending on the temperature conditions, it can last up to 72 hours. And some other disorders in the muscular system, we got tetanus. Some of you probably gotten a tetanus shot before, but what tetanus causes, it causes the cholinesterase, is the enzyme, to not break down the acetylcholine. And so essentially, your muscles contract and they don't relax because you've changed, because that bacteria, the neurotoxin, yes, it's a neurotoxin, affects the synapse. And so that's why you have to get a tetanus shot every once in a while. Once you get tetanus, there's no cure. It usually starts in your jaw. For whatever reason, lockjaw occurs and then it'll spread. Myotonia, this is a delayed relaxation of skeletal muscles after a contraction, stimulation, being startled. These fainting goats have myotonia congenita. So if you ever hear the fainting goats, that's what they have. Myasthenia gravis, probably pronounced that wrong. It just means grave muscular disease. It's autoimmune, which means the immune system attacks it. And what happens is your acetylcholine receptors are damaged. And so you might have a drooping eyelid, blurred vision. Muscular dystrophy, your muscles get progressively weaker. And there's a form called, and there's a type that occurs, it's sex-linked recessive or sex-linked in males. So ALS, this is amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. It's a progressive neurodegenerative disease. And essentially what happens is the motor neurons that are affected by the motor nerves that are affected by the motor neurons that provide voluntary muscle movement. So those are what's affected. So amyotrophic comes to Greek language, means A means no, myo muscle means nourishment. And so basically the muscle atrophies or wastes away. Always interesting as we talk about poisons that affect neuromuscular. We don't have time, but there's botulism. So if you hear about people getting Botox, they're essentially getting a neurotoxin injected into their face or armpit or whatever. So on the left is the typical normal transmitter release. So you have your neuron, you've got your acetylcholine, which is in red. You have the syntaxin and SNAP25. They're called snare proteins, right? And so what will happen is that acetylcholine will fuse to the membrane and release acetylcholine. What botulism does, it goes in and it cleaves that snare protein. It changes that snare protein. So what happens is that botulinum toxin, right, binds up, and so the botulinum toxin binds as opposed to the acetylcholine. So there's Botox. Strychnine, right, lowers the threshold of action potential, making it more likely muscles will contract, and usually death occurs from convulsions and asphyxia. Strychnine was a popular poison back in I think the 1800s, 1900s. There's a play or something called Strychnine and Lace or something like that. But Curare, that's a good one. That's a neuromuscular blocking agent, and that becomes flaccid, and it's skeletal muscle again because it's affecting neuromuscular acetylcholine. And so this one is often found in plants, and sometimes you hear about these like poison dart frogs. They have Curare. So, anyways, all right. So I reduced that down to 7 minutes. I would start sliding filament theory again. You guys are going to be getting the abbreviated version of these things next week. We may try to do a little bit of sliding filament theory, and then I think we'll do muscle fatigue lab. So, anyways, hope this was helpful. It's about 8 minutes. Again, stuff I'll be doing in class. But this is me signing off from Room 102. Have a great day, and I will see you face to face, hopefully sometime.